So let's keep with the music theme.
Yes.
In 2005, you received your second Academy Award nomination for Ray, a musical biopic based on the life of Ray Charles, directed by Taylor Hackford.
Right.
So the film's narrative is non-linear to an extent in that it plays around with time to tell Ray's story. Much of this, it seems to me, is done within the structure of a song, or the confines of a song. So I wonder, we'll see a clip to illustrate this, but I wonder if you can give us some insight into how you approached this particular film, how you approached dealing with his, the non-linear element of telling his story.
Well, I followed the script.
Yeah.
And I would be cutting a scene, and it would say, you know, Ray is in a recording studio, and I play, you know, we'd do the number, and then it would cut to another location, and it would say, music plays on, or music plays through. I thought, okay. Then it would cut to another location, it would say, music plays through. So I just basically followed the script. In terms of the final cut, what happened was that we found that many of the flashback sequences were very powerful and most effective, and were concentrated in the beginning of the film. So what we did was we took them and sort of sprinkled them through the length of the film, which was it was very successful. But in this particular case, the reason I chose this clip was, first of all, I love the songs involved. And second of all, it illustrated one of these situations where the song would start in one place and take you to another. And there's something about when you play music against film, it liberates you to break all the rules of physical reality, and time and space are not important. You can transport to a different place, a different time. And this particular song represented a number of things for me, sort of a distillation of the whole film in a way, because it represents Ray at the peak of his powers as a performer, and it also represents him at the depth of his addiction to heroin. And he's also maintaining a fiction with his home life, married and with children, while he's carrying on an affair with his lead singer. So all these elements are combined in these few minutes, and reflect the larger story in microcosm. But anyway, to me, it's an enjoyable piece to watch. I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, let's see the clip. There was a transition right at the beginning there, like a circular wipe. Was that your idea? Why did you choose that particular transition?
Well, I've always liked wipes. I've been using them since my very first film, Hi Mom, and when I started working, you know, when I was called in to help out on Star Wars, I pitched the idea to George, and he liked it because the whole idea of Star Wars was to be reminiscent of sort of 1930s movie serials like Flash Gordon, and it was a sort of a style back then, and that got incorporated into that. And then I always find that when you're making a transition from one static shot to another static shot, you have a choice of doing a straight cut or a dissolve, or if you can introduce movement into it, I figure why not? You know, so if it's appropriate, I reach for that tool. One of the interesting things about this number, I forgot to mention beforehand, it's probably too late to say it now, but the recording we were using was from a live performance, and Ray had started out off mic. So in order to cover that problem in the sound, he had Jamie Foxx start singing into the mic and turn it around to reflect that the sound problem that we couldn't fix. He justified by shooting it. It was a little touch, but Taylor did a great job. So did Jamie.
So we've touched on the influence of dance and music in your life there.
Yes.
A sort of the yin, I guess, to the other half, or another big portion of your sensibility as an artist, which is the visual side. You touched on it earlier. But you know, it's fascinating to me that your father, Joseph, was a noted painter whose works are in the Museum of Modern Art.
And the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And permanent collections of dozens and dozens of museums in the United States.
And other members of your family were important art collectors, and you yourself majored in art history
Yes.
at Columbia University. So what can you talk a bit about the relationship as you see it between painting or visual art and the art of editing?
You know, as I said, my strongest connection to what I do is through music. The attraction to painting and the visual arts is not as strong for me as the temporal one, the rhythm of time rather than the rhythms of space. That said, when I became an editor and started working in editing rooms, it reminded me a lot of my father's studio, where he would be surrounded. He'd have his canvas, and I had my screen, and he had his paints and his brushes, and I had my tool, my splicer, and my colored pens and grease pencils and various tools for working with film that don't apply anymore. But one of the things that attracted me to editing in the first place was I liked very much working with my hands. And even though it's not, watchmaking, it was still working with my hands. And it felt very familiar to me to have kind of a studio feel. So in that sense, it was a reflection of my father. But my father was, as many fathers are, powerful influences in a young man's life. And sometimes what you want to do is distance yourself from them and establish yourself on your own. So the idea of going into painting was not something I wanted to do. I didn't want to compete with the old man because he was too good. So I had to find my own thing.
You talk about influences there, and I'm not sure he's a father figure, but I mean, one of the biggest influences, it would seem to me, because the amount of times you work together, is director Brian De Palma.
Right.
So, you worked on 11 films. Could you talk about the influence you had on him and he had on you?
Well, he had a strong, I don't know about my influence on him, but he, rather than a father figure, he is 5 years older than I am, and we've done 11 films together, and we started out, I was 23 when I did my first picture with him, and so we were both learning. I was learning, and he was learning to direct, and we sort of grew up together. He was very important to me, supporting me, encouraging me, empowering me, validating me as a young editor, and I started to see, when I started working for other editors, Star Wars was the first picture I did for anyone other than Brian. I started to see footage through his eyes in terms of his reliance on the techniques of the point of view shot. So the actor you show an actor, he looks, you see what he sees, and then you see how he reacts. And these shots function as sort of a sentence, whereas the object, verb, and subject, object, verb. I got it backwards. Anyway, you can recut that sentence, but you get the idea. But he was a very strong influence on me, and great fun to work with, great visualist, and I moved to the West Coast. He stayed in New York, and when he would do a picture on the West Coast, he would call me, but he hasn't done that. He hasn't worked on the East Coast. He's worked only on the East Coast or in Europe lately, so we haven't had a chance to work together. But big influence in my life, and I owe him a lot.
Well, let's move to a clip of a 1976 movie called Blowout.
Right.
It's Brian De Palma's thriller. It's about a movie sound recordist who accidentally records what he thinks is a car accident on film. It turns out that it may not be the case. Before we see this, is there anything you may want to say?
Yeah, so to put this in perspective, after the Kennedy assassination, there was, I can't imagine what it would be like today with everyone having an iPhone, but in those days there was just one film of the incident. It hadn't been televised, so there was this one man, Zapruder, who recorded it on 8mm film. Time magazine, or Life magazine, bought the rights to the film, but it was felt that the film itself was too upsetting to be published for the American public. So what they did was they they printed one frame at a time of the crucial frames as stills in the magazine. And it occurred to Brian and many of us that if you took those and made them back into film, you could see the images in motion. Of course, they left out the crucial frames, but the principle of, the principle of taking stills and turning them back into film sort of caught his imagination. And so this is the sequence you're going to see. John suspects that the blowout was caused by someone shooting at the tire, and in this sequence he has to create film to put to the sound that he had already recorded to validate his suspicions. So this sequence that you'll see is an inadvertent record of a filmmaking technique which is now obsolete. So it's interesting from a historical perspective. And the other thing that might be interesting to editors, I assume there are many editors here, is that there are shots of John is trying to sync up sound with the picture, and there are shots of the moviola frame where the action on the screen is going backwards and forwards as he is going backwards and forwards. So as I was running this, I would stop and I would reverse, and then the image would keep going backwards and forwards. If I went forward, it went backwards and forwards. So I had to actually look at my hand to see which way I was running, because I couldn't tell from the image which way whether I was going backwards or forwards. But anyway, blowout.
And there was a red flash right at the beginning of that to transition. Was that also
right? So that was a device that we used to differentiate between a flashback from Ray's childhood, or from again, 11 years now. I forget. There was a white flashback that meant one thing and a red flashback that meant something else.
Okay.